At this point, Gaige Grosskreutz should just run for office. That's the proper and more efficient avenue to lie for profit. And besides, he's already demonstrated he belongs at the highest levels of the craft. He doesn't shy away from the lies of consequence. He didn't just dangle his toe over the line of perjury. He cannonballed over it without fear or hesitation. If your memory escapes you, well, that's a bit like his biceps, but to recover yours, he's the guy who advanced on and pointed his gun at Kyle Rittenhouse and was literally disarmed for his troubles. Gaige's aggression is why Kyle was acquitted on that particular murder charge against him, aggression to which Gaige admitted on the stand under oath.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
And then just a few days later, Gaige went on national TV to say, at least implicitly, actually no. What I said on the stand under oath wasn't truthful.
Why did you point your gun at him?
My arm was being vaporized as I was allegedly pointing my weapon at the defendant. It's completely inconsistent with the physiology of my wound that he would have shot me while my weapon was pointed at his head.
So you're saying that you actually you weren't pointing your gun at him?
That's absolutely what I'm saying, yes.
If that is absolutely what he's saying, then he is absolutely saying he was untruthful in court, which is absolutely perjury. But having never been held accountable for that lie or numerous other lies, like telling police he dropped his gun before he was shot, or numerous other criminal acts Gaige committed that night and in the years prior, Gaige is now back with a fresh stack of new lies, plus a multi-million-dollar invoice for what he says Kyle Rittenhouse and the taxpayer owe him. Gaige Grosskreutz actually filed a federal civil lawsuit against Kenosha city and county government and police in October 2021, a month before the Rittenhouse criminal trial began. That lawsuit has made slow progress since, but it's back in the news this week because now Gaige has formally added Kyle Rittenhouse as a defendant. Back in 2021, it was reported that Gaige was seeking a $10 million payout.
Last month, Grosskreutz filed a $10 million lawsuit for damage he suffered in the shooting.
What sort of compensation Gaige is seeking now is undisclosed, safe to assume more, but the theory of this lawsuit is a conspiracy between Kenosha government and vigilantes like Kyle Rittenhouse to violate Gaige's constitutional rights through retaliation against his First Amendment exercise, denial of his right to equal protection because police were discriminatory in their enforcement, intentional and negligent infliction of emotional distress, among other claims. Gaige has now added Rittenhouse personally to several of these allegations. In addition to claims of assault and battery, Gaige says Rittenhouse, too, has inflicted emotional distress on him. Kyle Rittenhouse made Gaige Grosskreutz big sad, so Gaige demands to collect big sad money because, after all, the revolution ain't free.
Long live the revolution.
Long live the revolution!
That was the smirk of emotional distress, by the way, in case you missed it. But that's the thing about emotional distress. Sometimes it's well-deserved. If you point a gun in my face and I respond by making you feel sad about it, good. Consider yourself lucky you're still around to feel anything at all in that scenario. And so to build any credibility to a claim of emotional distress at all, Gaige has to build a corresponding web of lies and omissions to make Kyle an aggressor and Gaige just a good boy who was minding his own night of revolutionary arson. The way this complaint rewrites the events of that night in Kenosha is a work of pure fiction, inventing new facts and omitting key ones to create a timeline of events that simply did not happen. Of course, for that reason, these claims have no business in court, but if this case actually does make it to a jury, I can't wait to see how Gaige's legal team attempts to substantiate it. For full context, some of these claims were written in the original lawsuit complaint from before the criminal trial, so maybe they were just seeing what they could get away with, but these false claims have still been refiled in the amended complaint, now including Rittenhouse, in federal court in Milwaukee on February 14th. They could have edited these lies to reflect the facts as presented at the criminal trial. They haven't. They've just doubled down on them. Gaige's complaint insists repeatedly that Rittenhouse was breaking the law merely with his armed presence, just by carrying the rifle. In fact, that's one of Gaige's causes for action against the police. They failed to intervene, and specifically, they failed to intervene with a teenager carrying a weapon of war in open defiance of Wisconsin law, with no mention that Kyle wasn't just acquitted on that charge, but the judge dropped it outright because of technical unclarities in the law. The law was inapplicable, and therefore, Kyle is not guilty of breaking it. You could argue the judge's interpretation is mistaken, but open defiance of Wisconsin law is not at all how the matter was adjudicated in a court of Wisconsin law. And even if Gaige's team sincerely believed that claim before the matter was settled, they continue to lie about it after the matter is settled against their characterization. But that lie is just a tiny one relative to how Gaige's complaint characterizes the key events of that night, the attacks on Kyle and Kyle defending himself. Gaige's complaint says Kyle was walking around pointing his gun at randos. Of course, that was the prosecution's final Hail Mary they could never substantiate despite their best actual soy jack attempts, but it reads further that when Kyle was done pointing, he just started shooting. He started shooting indiscriminately, in fact, just at citizens on the street. Again, this is in the filing this month, not the filing pre-criminal trial, completely ignoring the fact that Kyle was acquitted for shooting very discriminately, actually, with precision discrimination against only those who attacked him first. The reason he's a free man is because of that precision, not because of recklessness, which is why the lies only intensify from here. If Gaige is going to claim that Kyle pointed at and shot at people randomly and indiscriminately, of course, he has to omit any mention of these people, including himself, attacking Kyle first. And so he goes chronologically. Joseph Rosenbaum, the man who first chased Kyle down the street and threatened to kill him prior, according to this complaint, was just a guy who had confronted Kyle, asking him politely not to point his weapon of war at people. No mention of Rosenbaum threatening, chasing, and grabbing Kyle's gun before Kyle fired those shots. Then, of course, comes Jump Kick Man, the violent career criminal who advanced on Kyle, trying to kick him in the head while Kyle was down. No. According to this complaint, he was just a victimized capital B black man, demonstrating how non-threatening he was by keeping his hands politely in his pockets. And because he was only trying to kick Kyle's gun to protect others from violence, despite his unmentioned career of perpetrating violence against others, except in this particular case apparently, Kyle had no reasonable basis for believing his life was in danger. Right, that was the Binger rule. It takes 2 feet to commit felony assault and battery. 1 doesn't count.
You didn't see a gun?
No.
You didn't see a knife?
No.
All he uses is 1 foot.
Or maybe that's the Spider-Man rule, I forget.
Everybody gets 1. Tell him, Peter.
Apparently everybody gets 1.
Bingo.
Next up is Anthony Huber, the guy who tried to bash Kyle with his skateboard, except in Gaige's version of events, there is no skateboard at all. Huber just tried to disarm Kyle by pulling his rifle away, Gaige says, and then Kyle shot him. And this might be the most outrageous sentence in the entire document. Gaige says Kyle shot Huber, skateboard guy, without provocation or any legal justification. Then what was the legal justification that convinced the jury, Gaige? If there was no legal justification, then how did the jury conclude that there was? And making this claim that there was no legal justification all the more outrageous, it's actually a new addition to Gaige's complaint. Maybe you could understand Gaige saying this before the criminal matter had been settled in court. He didn't. The original complaint from 2021 says no such thing. It says Huber was a hero, an equally preposterous claim, but Gaige is making up this lie that Kyle had no legal justification to shoot skateboard guy after a jury of Kyle's peers unanimously determined that he clearly did. And of course, as you'd expect, when we finally get to Gaige's account of how and why he received his fateful bicepsectomy, there is no mention of what he testified under oath on the stand, that he pointed his gun at Kyle before the shot was fired. In this version of events, Gaige had his hands up, clearly trying to defuse the situation. It was a Michael Brown reenactment. Hands up, don't shoot. And in a way, I guess it is a Michael Brown reenactment because it's a total lie, omitting the part about advancing on Kyle after his hands were up and pointing his gun at Kyle, and only then did Kyle shoot. Not according to me, not according to the video you can watch, but according to Gaige Grosskreutz himself under oath.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him that he fired, right?
Correct.
But if you can't win on the facts, you can always try on the shrieking. And of course, there is no more reliable shrieking than crying racism. And maybe you think, well, how in the hell is a white guy with a proud German name that Hitler would admire, who got shot by another white guy, going to claim racism? Well, Gaige makes the attempt. See, the Kenosha police are very racist, Gaige says. After all, they only have 8 black cops on the force, and Kyle Rittenhouse is also very racist. A white nationalist, in fact, seeing as how he once made a hand sign. Never mind, that was after the events relevant to this case. Besides, if you're not convinced, remember that Kyle met with an Afro-Cuban guy once. That's how much of a dedicated white nationalist he actually is. Why in the hell does any of that matter? Well, because the very racist Kenosha police teamed up with the very racist Kyle Rittenhouse to engage in a conspiracy to punish allies of people of color, like good boy ally Gaige Grosskreutz, without any explanation offered whatsoever for why so many other heroic white allies that night were not shot by Kyle Rittenhouse or the police. But fine. It's not the first laughably frivolous, tortured logic lawsuit, and it certainly won't be the last. But what makes this complaint even more frustrating is that the logic used to implicate Kyle implicates Gaige himself in almost every way. Kyle was illegally carrying, Gaige insists. No, he wasn't. That was Gaige. It's not just that Gaige was armed, it's that Gaige was illegally carrying. His concealed weapons permit had expired, as he admitted under oath.
Were you armed?
I was.
Did you have a permit to carry a concealed weapon?
I did.
Was it in effect on August 25th, 2020?
It was not.
Had it expired?
It had.
And it's far worse than that, actually. Gaige had a prior felony burglary conviction that was expunged, meaning his gun rights in general were restored. But it wasn't just on that night that Gaige was illegally carrying either. In 2015, Gaige was illegally carrying while driving drunk and unpermitted. At the time, he was a felon. That was before his conviction was expunged. Police noted he should be charged for felon in possession of a firearm, but that complication too has magically disappeared in the years since. But fine. Mistakes were made. Gaige still supports your Second Amendment rights, he says.
I believe in the Second Amendment. I'm for people's right to carry and bear arms.
Unless, of course, you use whatever he arbitrarily decides is a weapon of war to defend yourself from his aggression. Then your Second Amendment rights are trash. And if that sounds hypocritical or contradictory to you, shut up and pay him. Oh, but maybe Gaige thought he was acting defensively that night. Maybe he misunderstood and he thought Kyle was an active shooter and he really was just trying to do the right thing. Maybe Gaige genuinely believed Kyle was on a homicidal rampage, as he still alleges in his complaint, despite the facts now showing otherwise. The trouble is, Gaige himself expressed thoughts consistent with a homicidal rampage, or at least murderous intent toward Kyle. Recall, Gaige's friend Jacob Marshall visited him in the hospital and posted on Facebook apparently unironic flexed biceps emojis captioned, "Can't stop my boy," despite the fact that Gaige was stopped and can't flex as the emojis depict. But more importantly, according to this friend, Gaige said in the hospital that his only regret was not killing the kid, as in Kyle, and hesitating to pull the gun before emptying an entire mag into him. Should have killed Kyle right then and there, Jacob said. But of course, that too was a lie we're supposed to believe. Marshall testified at trial. No, Gaige never said that. I made that up because Rittenhouse supporters were being mean to Gaige and me. So I thought if I just made up a story about wanting to kill Kyle, that would get Kyle's fans off my case. Makes about as much sense as claiming to be a victim of anti-black racism under the name Grosskreutz. Every bunk premise in this lawsuit is built upon the foundation of its most fundamental one, that Gaige somehow has not received what he deserves. This lawsuit is redundant. Gaige got exactly what he deserved with the added bonus of his life. If you point a gun at somebody and survive to feel sad about it later, the resolution is not a check. The resolution is your gratitude that you're even around to feel these feelings at all. This isn't a difficult concept. In fact, I've even seen clowns articulate it clearly.
Get what you fucking deserve!
Listen to the clowns, Gaige. Their case is much more sensible. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.